Okay, I'm glad you're back. We are still trucking along with our theme of common questions. And this one is one that I hear a few times occasionally, here and there. But it is very important to think about this at the beginning stages of writing your book. And throughout, if you still feel like you haven't figured it out. But how do I make sure my story ends in the right place? The ending is just as important as the beginning, but really they're kind of a team. But the ending can be kind of tricky for some people, certain stories in particular. So let's jump into this. This is how I want you to think about where your book ends. Now, we talked about some structures and we talked about, how you want to bring your readers on a journey of transformation, a journey of change. They want to see that you are in a different place by the end of your book. But sometimes that is a little hard to pinpoint. Sometimes you feel like you're still kind of in the middle of it, or there's things unresolved, or maybe your story involves other people that, have other involvement in your story, right? There's things maybe tangential to your perspective that affect where it might end. So let's talk about this. First of all, you need to think of your first and last chapters as bookends. This is how I think of them. They need to match. They're not going to be identical, but they have to be like a pair, right? They're like partners. They're like besties. They're husband and wife. They're brother and sister. They're whatever. Okay, they're the same but different. They have to match. There must be an obvious transformation that has happened from the start to the end. Okay, so you're not starting and ending in the same place. You're not back to where you started. You're not like trying to figure something out and then your story ends when you fail to figure that thing out and you really haven't achieved anything. That's not really a story. That's sort of a little short anecdote you tell your friends over cocktails, okay? But in your memoir, in your book, you must have a journey of change present within your book, and that end is the conclusion of that change. So a good test for this is you take your outline. If you have an outline, this is what you will do. You take your outline and you look at those 2 chapters only. And this is the type of outline that works the best with this exercise. You've heard me talk about this before, but what you want to do with your story, with your book, is break it down by chapter and then just describe each chapter, what happens. What are the events? Give me like a paragraph, a couple of lines. And then in addition, for each chapter, tell me what's going on inside. So this might be for chapter 1. Let's say I used divorce in a few examples in previous videos on structure that I just did, that I think is tangible enough for us to grasp. So I'm going to go back to that. Maybe your first chapter, you describe your wedding and how you're so excited to be a wife, or how you're so excited to have found your special person. And so the events are preparing for the wedding and picking out your dress and walking down the aisle and saying I do and all that stuff, okay? The stuff going on inside, this is how you feel, where you're mentally at, where you're emotionally at. You're excited, maybe you're nervous, you're a little freaked out, kind of in a good way, like you're not sure exactly how this is going to go, but you know this is what you want, this is the right thing. Maybe there's some apprehension, but only because, maybe you write it off like, I'm just nervous, this is what everyone feels like on their wedding day. We need to know what's going on inside and outside. So then you take us to the last chapter and you do the same thing. You tell us what happened outside and you tell us what's going on inside. So this might, in a story with an arc of change, in a book that's maybe about divorce and where you started out happily married and you ended up not happily married, right, in a different place, your conclusion might be, I signed the lease for my new apartment. I'm this single woman on a new adventure, right? Like you signed a lease, you brought in your box, you plopped it down on the counter and you looked around at this empty apartment and kind of had a little moment there, right? Like, okay, this is not where I saw myself 5 years ago or whatever, whenever that wedding date was, right? This is not where I saw myself 5 years later. This is not where I thought I would be. But you have this sense of peace. You have this sense of accomplishment. You have this sense of pride and success because what we don't see in those middle chapters, right? When you take out the front and back, we don't see the middle stuff. We don't see that you went through this horrible divorce and you had to heal all of your broken wounds and all of this stuff, protect yourself from this spouse who wasn't good for you, etc. So you end up with, I'm so happy because I got married. I'm a little freaked out, but that's totally normal, no big deal, to I am starting a new chapter in my life. I'm a happy woman because I have healed myself. I've learned to love myself. I've gotten out of a bad relationship. And now here I am ready to start fresh. So you can kind of tell that these are matching because they're not, well, and matching is kind of a bad word here, but they're not the same, right? They're in different places. We didn't end up back married again to the same person in the same miserable relationship if that's really not what your story's about, right? We didn't end a year later. We didn't end before the divorce. We ended where you were transformed. You have a story to give to your readers. You have a gift to give them within your story. So within this story, that gift might be something like, learn to stand on your own 2 feet. Let me show you how I did it. You don't need to stay in a bad relationship. Let me show you how I did it. You don't need to be married to be happy in yourself, happy in your life. Let me show you how I did it. So these bookends, what we want to see is your theme running through them. So let's say your theme is, I've always wanted to be happy. This is your journey to happiness. You thought maybe happiness meant, a spouse and kids and a white picket fence, right? Like you have this version of happiness in the beginning, but later your version of happiness is something totally different. So what we see in the first chapter and the last chapter when we pluck them out are 2 different versions of happy. Maybe what you thought happy would be in the beginning, but now in conclusion, you feel a sense of happiness that you've reached something so monumental. You're proud of yourself. You're happy that you did this. You feel this joy and this freedom. Not the same that you felt earlier, but they're matching. Their happiness, the happiness theme is running throughout, okay? In the middle, you're probably like, happiness, what's that? Like, I'm miserable. I'm going through all of this hard stuff. I'm climbing this big giant mountain of conflict and dealing with all of these horrible things from these horrible people. But look at where you came out of, right? You were up here feeling happy on your wedding day. You went down here, you were like miserable, and then you came up and you were happy again. Just a different happy, just a different version. Maybe you learned that happiness comes from inside and not outside, right? That could be the theme of your book. So these bookends match. So you can kind of get a sense of your entire story when you look at just the first and last chapters. You can get a sense of the entire arc. I don't even have to tell you what happened in the middle if I say I go from a happily married woman to a happily single woman, right? I don't really have to tell you what happened in the middle. We can kind of infer that some bad stuff happened and you came out the other side and you were like, maybe I'm better and stronger and happier now. What if your story is ongoing, right? So for example, what if your loved one is ill and you're kind of counting down the days, their days are numbered, and you are writing about this journey that they're going on, or that you are perceiving as far as your perspective on their story, how it's affecting you, how it's affecting your life and maybe your future. Do you need to wait until they pass for your story to be completed? Maybe, maybe not. There could be a different ending. So for example, maybe in that story, you talk about how you, love this person in the beginning and you were just crushed by their illness and you had to learn to love them despite this new version of themselves, of them. Maybe it's an accident, right? Maybe someone was handicapped and all of a sudden they are a completely different person than who you married, let's just say. You have to come to grips with this. This is your story of learning to love in a different way and coming to acceptance of this new version of this person that you love. Coming to, grieve this old version, maybe coming to grips on the fact that their days are numbered and that their life is coming to an end, and how that affects your version of your mortality, how you perceive your life in the reflection of theirs. So to my ultimate point, your story doesn't necessarily need to end when they're all better or when they're past, if that's kind of what you're counting it down to, or when, maybe they've come out of, cancer treatment in remission, and, you don't need to necessarily wait for that. What is a natural ending to where this story started? There might be a place where you come to acceptance or peace or internal love, that type of thing, gratitude for life, or just something that comes full circle. Like, you know what? This is happening. I still love them. There is this moment that tells me this. There's this moment that says everything is going to be fine. There might be stuff that happens after that. That's okay. Your story can still end at a particular place before everything is done. I hope that makes sense. It's a hard concept for me to explain without an actual example and showing you in a particular book. I will see if I can find an example of that. But another way to think of this is, what if you're still dealing with some residual issues? Let's go back to the divorce example. Does your story end like right when the divorce is finalized? Does your story end when you get remarried? Does your story end when your ex is like hit by a train or something, right? Like, when does your story end in the divorce context? In my divorce story, maybe, like, we split 6 years ago and our divorce took 3.5 years. And, isn't it technically still ongoing, the story that I'm a single woman and I'm not remarried and I'm still technically divorced, right? Like, there's just, in theory, that's still continuing. When does it end? If your story is about divorce, well, let's take it back from the beginning. That's kind of how you figure out where your end is. Where does it start? Now, if you have an issue figuring out where it starts, we're going to have to start it over. We're going to have to send you to a different video. We're going to have you set up a call with Danielle to talk, because your story shouldn't be about everything. The point of this video is to let you know that there's going to be a natural ending. To answer where the story ends, you may have to look at the beginning. To answer where the story begins, you may have to look at the end. But either way, these two are connected. It's just sometimes hard to see the ending if you don't know exactly where it begins, and vice versa. So I want you to just think about that arc of change. Think about how these 2 points in time are connected. Where are they connected? Is it here? Is it 1 year earlier? Is it 1 year later? Are you still maybe not done living your story? Maybe you know that there is something happening that could feel more conclusory, and you want to wait until that happens. That's okay. Sometimes you just pick an ending and you start writing, and by the time you're done, you may have a better idea. Maybe you even have something like, an epilogue that tells us, well, I ended it here in the last chapter, but here's what's happened since. Kind of ties up some loose ends for the readers. So there are a few different options here, but it depends, really on your theme, what message you want to portray in your book, what your journey is, and where you feel like you've accomplished something. There has to be sort of like a conclusion, like an accomplishment, a win, a victory, a moment where you acknowledge your growth, where you acknowledge your evolution, where you acknowledge that things are okay. Sometimes that's it. Sometimes that's the win. Things are all right. That's okay. So I hope this was helpful. These are not black and white questions, black and white answers at all. Okay. They are all over the place sometimes. They're all sorts of different colors. They're not even gray. So you keep asking questions, and I will keep doing my best to respond in a general way that can apply to everyone. But definitely reach out to me to set up some time to talk if you really do need help clarifying all of this. Because if you do not nail your ending and your beginning right when you're starting your project, it can be very difficult to shape this and keep writing and keep writing. At some point, you're going to have those defined bookends in order to finalize your story. So I'm here to help. Let me know what I can do. In the meantime, please come back for my next video where I answer another question that may be, at some point sat on your heart for a little while. We'll see. I'll see you in the next video, and we'll continue our fun chats.